Good evening. You're watching the main news on ATV. I'm Edna Tse.
And I'm Anne-Marie Sim. Here are tonight's top stories.
At least 2 dead and 180 critically injured in plane crash at San Francisco airport.
Tunmun locals and lawmakers in protest against landfill expansion plan.
Dozens call for rent control laws and shorter public housing waiting lists.
A South Korean airline packed with more than 300 people crash-landed at San Francisco airport, killing 2 people and injuring more than 180.
Both dead were Chinese citizens and some of the injured are in a critical condition.
Investigators are not ruling out a mechanical problem as the cause of the crash, but they're focusing on whether the flight came in too low. This amateur video was taken moments after the Asiana Airlines flight crashed and burst into flames as it landed at San Francisco airport.
We had a Boeing 777 Asiana Flight 214 that was originating in Seoul, South Korea, destined for San Francisco. They were coming in on runway 28 left at San Francisco International Airport, and they crashed on landing.
There were 16 crew members and 291 passengers on board.
There were 77 Koreans, 141 Chinese descent, 61 U.S. citizens, 1 Japanese American, and about 11 others of different ethnicities. That accounts for 291 passengers. I'd like to say at this time, with the help of so many people, we have accounted all 307 passengers and crew. Everyone has been accounted for.
Hospital officials said most of the injured were critical. Victims suffered spinal fractures, internal bleeding and concussions.
Yes, there are several patients with serious injuries, several patients with life-threatening injuries, and then a number of patients obviously with varying degrees of injuries as well.
Remarkably, most of the passengers and crew on board made it off the burning plane unhurt.
When we had arrived on scene, the chutes had already been deployed, and we observed multiple numbers of people coming down the chutes and actually walking to their safety, which was a good thing.
Investigators picked through a trail of debris searching for the cockpit voice and data recorders that may tell the tale of the final seconds of Asiana Flight 214.
There is currently and continues to be no indication that terrorism or any criminal acts contributed to the incident.
A team from South Korea left for San Francisco today to help with the crash investigation. Witnesses said the wide-bodied Boeing 777 was approaching the runway at an unusually high nose-up angle, its tail section hitting a seawall dividing the runway from San Francisco Bay, possibly causing the tail to break apart.
I saw a plane coming in really fast, and it appeared to be coming in pretty hard. And then I saw sparks from one of the engines. And that was probably because of the landing incident, of course. And then it spun, did a 360, and then a bunch of smoke and fire, of course.
While survivors reported hearing the plane's engines rev up just before the crash, which experts say is consistent with the pilot trying to gain height after realizing at the last minute that the plane was too low.
The plane went jolted up and down, and then it's flipped or something like that. I'm not sure. And then it hit the ground, and then, yeah, so.
Officials said a navigation system that helps pilots make safe descents was turned off when the airliner crashed. The glide path system is meant to help planes land in bad weather, but it was clear and sunny with light winds when the crash occurred. It's the first ever fatal accident involving the Boeing 777. A British Airways flight crash-landed a few metres short of a runway at London's Heathrow Airport in 2008. All on board survived. Investigators blamed the crash on fuel blockages caused by ice particles formed during the long flight from Beijing, a finding that led to changes in the design of the Rolls-Royce engines used on some 777s.
Angry Tunmun residents held a protest today against government plans to expand a landfill near their homes.
Environment Under Secretary Christine Lowe says the plan is still in its early stages, so there's still time for locals to raise their concerns. Bo Lang reports.
The government's plans to expand landfills in Tunmun and Taguling have left the people who live near them seething. So this morning they took to the streets in their cars and vented their anger while driving slowly from Lung Pu Tan to Tu Mun landfill. The expansion plan was given the green light earlier this week in Legco, and some lawmakers and local councillors joined the slow drive. The protesters are calling on lawmakers to vote down the government's request for cash when it asks the Finance Committee for funding on Friday. They have also threatened to block the landfill entrances if the funding request is passed. Officials say they need $7 billion to expand the Taku Ling site by 70 hectares and another $35 million to study whether it's feasible to enlarge the Tu Mun landfill by 200 hectares. Despite widespread opposition to the plans, Environment Secretary Wong Kam Sing said today he will continue to lobby legislators for support. Wong said he understands the plight of the residents, but admitted it won't change his perspective or the plans. He insisted there has to be a balance between the needs and demands of the people, and it's not a good idea to let the issue drag on. The Environment Chief said even if an incinerator is built and improvements made to the way waste is handled, the landfill still need to be expanded. Environment Under Secretary Christine Low, once dubbed Hong Kong's Green Queen, stressed that the landfills are needed for all districts and there must be a public consensus and compromise. She added that the Tu Mun landfill expansion plan is in its early stages, so residents still have a few more years to tell officials they don't like the idea. Low, who once spoke of the importance of expanding country parks, warned that the Zhongguan O dump will reach capacity in 2015, so the government's plan to expand it into a country park could be resurrected soon. She said the measures only dumping dusty construction waste into the Zhongguan O tip and sending municipal waste to the other two dumps will take time to draw up. The government was forced to withdraw plans to enlarge the Zhongguan O landfill after a lack of support from lawmakers. Berlin, ATV News.
Dozens of protesters are calling on the government to review the rent control policy to safeguard tenants and keep its promise of the 3-year wait for public housing.
Meanwhile, some community care fund members said they will propose to the administration to provide subsidy to those living in subdivided homes in industrial buildings. About 100 protesters with various demands, all related to housing, gathered at Southern Playground in Wan Chai before marching to the government's headquarters at Tamar. They shouted slogans accusing the government of failing to tackle the problem of high rent. The group demanded the government review the landlord and tenant ordinance passed in 2004, which they claim is outdated. They hope the administration could include factors such as giving rent bargaining power to tenants, restrict landlords from increasing rents above inflation, and extend removal notices to 6 months. Among the crowds were some subdivided housing residents who complained that the waiting time for public housing flats is more than the 3 years promised by the government. This man said he's been waiting for 4 years and hasn't had any feedback from the authorities. Some legislators, including Civic Party lawmaker Chan Ka-lok, Labour Party's Sid Ho, and ADPL member Frederick Fung, also took part in the rally. Over in Kwun Tong, New People's Party lawmaker Michael Tian and Unionist legislator Peter Zheng visited some residents of subdivided homes in industrial buildings. The lawmakers, who are members of the Community Care Fund, wanted to see for themselves what the living standards of the poor are like. Mrs. Ng lives in this 400-square-foot unit with 3 family members and pays $2,800 a month rent. She said the roof leaks when it rains and it's a nightmare when there is a typhoon. Speaking after the visit, Tian said it's time to take action and provide help to those living in such poor conditions.
Having visited the situation today and realizing that these people are actually paying half of what the market demands for similar situation in a private residential building, they are here by force. They have no choice but to live here. And I don't believe that by including them in a subsidy, it would mean legitimizing it.
Tian was supported by Zheng, who will submit a report to members of the Community Care Fund and Commission on Poverty.
We are going to convince all the members in COP and CCF to give the report to them, what we see and what we listen, and then convince them to have discretion to these residents, whom they are live in the subdivided unit, especially in the industrial building.
They hope the report will be ready by the end of the month. Thousands of estate agents and property owners protested today against the government's measures to cool property prices.
The organisers claim the number of deals has dropped by as much as 70% since last year. Bad news in an industry that relies on commission. Emily Sue reports.
Scrap dangerous stamp duty, chanted these protesters as they marched from Victoria Park to the government's offices at Tamar. They were carrying paper chilies to symbolize what they call drastic measures put in place by the government to curb speculation and skyrocketing property prices. The marchers were estate agents, property owners, and middle-class members, many of them from a group calling itself the Stamp Duty Victims Alliance. They want the government to scrap a number of property cooling measures, including the doubling of stamp duty on sales exceeding $2 million. Some legislators also turned up to show their support, including industrial lawmaker Nam Tai Fai. The demonstrators called Housing Secretary Anthony Zheng a liar and said the new stamp duty did not serve its purpose as property prices are still going through the roof and out of the reach of most locals.
After the government adds so many policies, cannot cannot induce the property price to significant down, and not so from the transaction volume we can see more people can buy the properties.
Wang said since stamp duty policies were introduced, the number of property transactions dropped as much as 70%. Based on last year's figures, there were 500 sales per month compared to 10,000 to 12,000 before. At this rate, Wang stressed, more than half of the 37,000 people working in the real estate sector will be forced to leave the industry, as most rely on commission from sales they make. Of the rest, 2/3 may eventually lose their jobs anyway, and 1/3 will barely have enough business to make a living. All in all, Wang said the government is using the wrong tactics to cool down the property market.
Our government must consider our opinion and see the real actual property data, like the transaction volume and transaction price.
Organizers say 23,000 people joined today's march, while police said the number was more like 5,500. They handed in a petition to a government representative after arriving in Tamar. The government issued a response to the protesters, saying their concerns have been heard, but the new stamp duties are necessary to stabilize the property market. Emily Sue, ATV News.
Still to come on ATV's main news. Dozens missing feared dead after runaway freight train explosion in Canada.
And the latest action from the final days of Wimbledon.
Historic sights, classic food, adorable turtles. Feel completely at ease. It's your dream hometown. Huizhou. Tourism Administration of Guangdong Province Special. Gold Coast Tour at Guangdong of China. Tonight at 8:30.
Current events. Controversial issues. In-depth accounts of the latest news and happenings that impact us all. Get to the heart of the matter. Get real with Inside Story. Tuesday night at 6:55.
7 couples. 30-day trip. It's lifetime happiness to travel around amazing sites. But it could also be a nightmare, because you cannot predict when you'll be voted to go home.